hopefully it works.
If you want, like Ryan could probably do it for you. Is that?
Yeah, I guess.
I think that's looking at like down there.
Fisheye.
Oh,
Fisheye.
oh, so I'm in it.
All right, so
Do I have to do anything like press a button?
no, it's good. It's already going.
Okay.
Thanks,
cool.
Dylan. So today I'm going to be talking about questionnaire design, and mainly I'm going to be focusing on designing questionnaires for the use post-test. So the difference between pre-test and post-test, there's a bit of a formatting difference, but you can still utilize most of what I'm covering today for the design of your questionnaire and the questions. All right? So without further ado, let's get started. So questionnaires are definitely used everywhere in HCI design, and not only just HCI design, anywhere where you need to gather data. So business, psychology, any kind of research. So it's an alternative method to actually doing contextual interviews that we covered last week. So that said though, questionnaires are relatively cost efficient to set up and to use. And also you can design questions for anything any concept that you can express in words. So the problem is that this methodology, just like contextual interviews, results in the responders actually knowing or being aware that their behavior is being recorded. So we have, as designers, we have to be very careful in ensuring that we design questionnaires and questions the right way so that we're able to glean accurate information from our questions. So we've all definitely filled out the questionnaire at some point in our lives. I know, Omid, since you spend so much time on Facebook, you've probably been subject to a lot of those online surveys and quizzes of, I am Gandalf on Facebook, what are you? So it's pretty similar to what we're trying to achieve with our questionnaires. The whole point is that we have a series of questions that we want our subjects to reply to in order to gain the data for evaluation. So it is also a quick and easy way to gain data as opposed to interviewing. Whereas, interviewing can take hours or days at a time. Questionnaires are relatively quick so that after 5-10 minutes, you're done. So you can typically administer a questionnaire throughout various points in the design cycle, such as during task requirements gathering, analysis, user experience testing, and product iteration reviews. The data is then used, ideally, for facilitating decisions, preference recognition, needs assessment, and effectiveness evaluations. But that said, due to the prevalence of questionnaires in our society today, there's kind of this perception that it's easy to come up with a questionnaire. You can just slap up a bunch of questions, no problem. 5 minutes, no research, no design really needed, right? No. So, although there might be cases where melange of randomly put together questions might work, it's not necessarily the case. So, if I point to the example on the left side, even though it's a bit of a farce, you might kind of get the feeling that it's a little bit weird. So, do you think you might get brain cancer from using a cell phone? Probably. Or, my neighbor Bill has one and he's been using it for years, but he gets top place and dominates at bingo every Sunday. It's followed up by, do you think you have brain cancer? Maybe. Yeah, but it's cool. So this is an example, although it's a bit of a satirical take on a questionnaire, it's pretty much relevant just because you don't want to ask stupid questions unless you really want to just troll your responders. So how do we then design our own questionnaires that will allow us to gain factual data by ensuring that the responders give us valid responses? So this is the abbreviated form of questionnaire design. First, we want to define the problem that we want to address. Then, we plan the administration of our questionnaires. After that, then we finally write the questionnaire, review it, and then pre-test, which is almost like a pilot test. Find out if there's any problems, and iterate if need be, depending on your budget and your schedule. So let's define the problem. What's the purpose of your questionnaire? Just like every design problem, you want to do what's the function over form? And the same thing applies to questionnaire design. You know, the purpose of your questionnaire must be clear, and you have to know what information you actually want to obtain from your questionnaire. You know, as researchers, we should have clearly stated goals and hypotheses, all right, that allow us to identify the information needed to come up with our question for our questionnaire. After we find a problem, we have to look at our demographic. So we should know this just simply because we need to isolate how we are going to actually administer the questionnaire. You know, for example, based on this chart, if I was doing a study on retired folks age 65 and above, obviously Facebook might not be the best way to administer this questionnaire just based on the demographic metrics on there, because there's only 70% reach of 55 and above. And by also identifying the demographic, we're able to phrase and word our questions in such a way that we know that our target audience is able to actually comprehend our questions and then reply to them. So you're not going to ask 13-year-old, what do you think of Tony Tang's lecture last Sunday or last Thursday night? He's not going to know that because he's not in that demographic, right? So what do we want the information for? You know, if we take this example and put them in one single questionnaire. Hey, what color socks are you wearing? Followed by vanilla or chocolate. Followed by what cuss word do you use the most? Do you think that kind of a questionnaire would make sense? As a responder, if you have to answer all these questions, what's going on? You're just wasting my time. And then after wasting the responder's time for a couple of questions, they start to tune out. And that's really bad because you want valid responses, not just, all right, you know, I'm bored, I'm sick of this, I'm just gonna answer whatever. Which happens a lot to me when I'm filling out Nintendo surveys. Believe it or not, because I just want those coins. So now, what do we want to discover from our questionnaire? So I call this the Jackie Chan rule. This is Jackie Chan. As you can see, Jackie loves animals. Right now, Jackie is at the UFC studying public perception on great white sharks. So since he's at the UFC, Tony Tang then approaches him and says, hey Jackie, you kind of have to get some data collected just to back up your research. And Jackie goes, okay. So Jackie goes back to his office, starts writing up his questionnaire. And after distributing his questionnaire and getting responses back and analyzing the data, he comes up with this final conclusion, which is a recent survey of market researchers shows that having your head in the sand leaves your behind exposed, which is valid, you know, from whatever point of perspective that you're looking at it from, but it doesn't really help Jackie's research because he's going on the hell. It doesn't really help him with public perception involving great white sharks. So the point and the moral of this story is that the responses for your entire questionnaire should allow you to formulate a solution to the research that you are currently pursuing. So don't ask random stuff, even though they might be formatted nice. So now, the administration plan. Questionnaires can be administered in the following methods: email, snail mail, telephone, in person, and by self-distributed surveys. Each method does have its own advantages and disadvantages. So you have to really start balancing your audience reach with your budget, with your timeline, with your schedule, and then you can come up with a solution. So there are two main methods of administration. One is the self-administered process. So this means that you just hand out a survey or questionnaire to anyone and they can fill it on their own time. It costs less. It's easy to administer, of course, because all you have to do is, as an administrator, is hand it out and say, be done, I'm done. I'll wait for you guys to do it, to hand it back to me. And you can typically preserve confidentiality because responders don't see you around. They can fill it out on their own time. The other method is the personnel administered one. This means that you're in a group or you're in a certain location and the administrator or the questionnaire administrator is present while you're filling out the survey. This helps involve more uneducated audiences who cannot comprehend the meaning of the questions. And this also allows you to ask certain kinds of questions that you can't typically ask if there's no one around to kind of explain them. So now we want to write the questionnaire. So we typically want an informative title, a clear introduction to why you're making the respondent fill out this questionnaire. You want interesting and well-organized questions because they're key in ensuring that responders are more inclined to keep responding to each other question. So, in short, don't do what he does unless you're a bit psycho. So the introduction, you always have to have a really nice introduction at the start of the questionnaire to explain what the study is about, what the data is being collected for, and you also want to take this time to introduce, okay, this is how your data is going to be handled in terms of confidentiality, what it's going to be used for, and yeah, just typically why you're collecting the data. This is really important. So responders are also more likely to view your questionnaire as more trustworthy if you add a little personalized touch to it. Not just say, hey, this is our survey for this study, please fill it out. That's kind of, yeah, that's acceptable, but it doesn't really make the respondent feel like they really should respond to it just because it's a really generic and general introduction. You know, you are actually asking your responders for a favor. So be courteous, be nice, try to be charismatic, and try to get your responders to be, hey, okay, I'll help you out, I'll fill out your survey or your questionnaire. So the question formats, typically two types of distinct formats. One is the open-ended question, which is, all right, for example, you see up there, what additional improvements, if any, would you like to see in product X, Y, Z? And then you leave blank spaces in order for the responder to fill out. So one thing wrong with open-ended questions is that, yeah, they're easier to design and create. However, just based on the different personalities that each responder has, it's very hard to analyze that data after and try to collate them all together. Because, for example, Renan might answer this question a certain way, whereas Anna might answer it another way. So how do you then analyze and compile that data together, even though it's the same question? So it becomes really hard to do that. So due to the nature of open-ended questions, it's very useful early in the design process just to gather descriptive information from your responders. So they're also great when you use it as a follow-up to closed-ended questions, so that responders are able to add in any extra comments that they have outside from what you actually planned on finding out. So the second part, which is closed-ended questions, opposite of open-ended questions. Now they're really narrow in the response range, and they allow you to quickly gather your data, analyze them, compile them together, and go, hey, this worked. Majority selected this, majority selected that. Now the issue with closed-ended questions is that first you have to come up with a data analysis plan and make sure you word and phrase the question in such a way that the responders are able to comprehend and then answer appropriately according to the response options that you give them. So let's go through the different types of close-ended questions. Does anyone have any questions so far? All right. Yes.
If you had a question that was like closed-ended, but it had like an other option, is that like somewhere? I guess it doesn't. This is like binary. Maybe it doesn't fit. Like, would you call it closed? I guess it doesn't matter.
That's
Or
a good question actually, because if you wait a while, I will show you what I've done with that.
Great.
Awesome. But that's cool. You're actually thinking. So this is called the choice of categories. You know, how often did you use product X, Y, Z in the past month? And then you give a bunch of options that you, as the designer, are able to, well, first make sense of the question and then analyze in terms of, okay, let's compile the data together. Second is, I can't pronounce this properly, the Likert scale. Is that right?
I don't know. Some people say Likert, some people say Likert.
Yeah. So, product XYZ is the best productivity software in the world. Do you agree, strongly disagree? Differential scale. Now you have an obvious numerical scale that you want your question graded upon. The checklist. This one's a bit different in such that you can actually allow your responders to select a bunch of different options and not just one single option. And finally, the rank. Almost similar to the checklist, but more used in terms of prioritization of interests. So now we can actually get the questionnaire ready. So now we know the basic formats. We have to understand now how to write and phrase our questions properly so that responders understand what we are actually asking from them. So our goal is actually to create responsible and comprehensible questions that will be able to provide us with the necessary data needed for our own research. So typically, if you design by group, you have to deal with a lot of that. And when you're actually writing your questions, you might think you're a genius, but then you get to the iterative process. So as mentioned before, you want each question to be easy to understand. You know, keeping your wording simple will typically reduce the confusion and ambiguity that responders have when reading a question. In addition, you know, question sentences should only contain 2 clauses at most, and longer sentences should be rephrased. So in short, in basic computer science logic, break it down, divide and conquer, get it to the most basic format possible. You want to be precise. You don't want to ask for more information that can be answered by one question. So, for example, please rate my presentation and content of my presentation today. This is actually asking for 2 pieces of information in one question. That's a big no-no because you typically in one question, especially when you're using a closed-ended question, how do you rate two variables with one answer unless they're both the same? So the best way to do it is to break that question down into 2 questions. For example, please rate my presentation, which is one question, and then the next question followed up would be, please rate the content of my presentation. So it's simple as that. So beware of questions that ask for 2 but are disguised as 1. Knowledge base. Remember that whole spiel on demographics that I was going on earlier? This is where it gets important. You want your responders or your intended responders to actually be able to answer your questions. Don't ask questions that don't make sense. You know, for example, it's like asking you guys, do you guys agree with the recent editorial changes at Ubisoft? Come on, do you guys agree or not? Right? I mean, you're going, what the hell? How do I respond? Yes, no? So you see what I mean? You guys, I would ask this at Ubisoft, but not to you guys, just because, again, it does not make sense because our target range is completely different or inappropriate for this question. So it's pretty common sense so far, right? Aha, this part is tricky and deadly. So you don't want to go into negatives if you can avoid it, especially the double negatives. You know, negatives often induce confusion among your responders. Think about the following question. TAs should not be paid reduced market rates for teaching. Agree? Disagree? Strongly agree? It's a bit vague in when I word it that way. So what happens if I reword it this way? TAs should be paid the standard market rate for teaching. Is that clear? Exactly. So avoid negatives if possible. Actually, avoid negatives whenever possible. Bias. This is a big thing just because it's easy as a sole designer to get caught up in that and not be able to identify that. So what bias means is essentially responders in general and people in society in general are more likely to answer to whatever conforms to the standard norms of society. So, for example, a question I might ask, which is potentially biased, is how many lectures this semester have you missed because of your job? And most academics, since they don't want to admit that their job is taking time out of their school life, will answer, no, not a lot. So even though their job might have been responsible for the majority of their lectures missed. So how do we reword that question? Well, we break it down again, divided by 2. Okay, so we can rephrase it as the first question to be, how many lectures have you missed this semester? And then the next one would be, how often has your work caused you to miss these lectures? So that way you actually have 2 pieces of data that you can then infer and grab your data and analyze your data from, rather than just putting it into one and trying to convince the responder that, okay, there's a right way of answering as opposed to a wrong way. So it's a very fine line in terms of eliminating bias. And one of the best ways to do it is just pre-testing and getting another designer to actually look through it and see, okay, is there a bias here, is there a bias there? So it's just getting a second point of view. Yes, be ethical and sensitive. Ensure that if you're asking and dealing with any potential ethic conflicts, that you seek approval and advice from your local ethics board. You must clearly state the use and confidentiality of the data, especially if you're intending on asking personal questions like, for I don't know, Jennifer, how much do you weigh? You know, that's like kind of sensitive and personal data. You don't want to ask that. Unless it's really important to what you're doing, then clear with ethics. And then you mention it specifically in your introduction. So minimize also the number of sensitive questions you might ask, because responders typically, since they're shying away from that, for example, if you're asking me my weight, my salary, my sexual preferences, I'm more likely to just chuck your questionnaire away. So minimize that if possible. And be relevant. Remember what I said, you're actually asking for a favor. Be sensitive to the time constraints that each responder might have, and just only ask relevant questions that are related to the data that you want and the conclusion that you want to achieve. You know, if, for example, with Jackie Chan, he's concerned about the life cycle of a great white shark. Why? On his questionnaire, if he asks, is Nicolas Cage in every movie nowadays? It doesn't make sense and takes away the focus of the questionnaire from the responder. So make sure every question is relevant and relates to your questionnaire and the purpose of the questionnaire. And then the formatting is especially important, all right? So obviously you want to start with your title at the very top, followed by your really nice and informative introduction. Then once you start placing the questions, start off with closed-ended questions. Never start off with open-ended ones. This is mainly because it's a lot easier and faster for responders to go, okay, check, circle, rather than I'm going to spend 5 minutes thinking about, this question, writing down my responses, and then, okay, now I'm tired. I'm going to chuck it all away. So, again, start off with closed-ended questions, finish off with open-ended ones. And don't forget to say thank you in the nicest way possible. Just like your introduction, add a personal touch to it. Now you want to review your questionnaire. So for the guys, apparently spelling makes you really hot with the chicks. So watch your formatting, watch your spelling. But you also want to make sure that your grammar is correct. We've done your spell checks, basically, which I know when I submitted my first draft, I didn't, which was really bad. So after you review it, now it's time to start a mock trial. Just like what we're doing in our research projects in this class, you want to run your questionnaire through a sample audience just to see what's wrong with the formatting or the comprehension, or even if asking a certain question makes sense. Once you get the data from this, then you go back and reiterate and change whatever you need to change in order to ensure that your questionnaire is actually valid and relevant to your research. That way you have a bit more confidence when you're actually distributing the questionnaire that it'll come back properly. By the way, I know iterations hurt, so prepare to suck it up. So with every round of iteration you do, remember it's a cycle. You want to evaluate, you want to test your iteration, then reiterate on it, and then cycle back to your reevaluation again. This is not only just for questionnaires, this is any part of design. That's just nature of it. You want to make a product better, you want to make your questionnaire better. Review, iterate, test, review again, iterate, test, and change. Of course, be sensitive to your budget and your timeline. I mean, if you have 1 day to do it, good luck. So now that we've gone through the basic cycle of questionnaire designs, you just have to think about the pros and cons of using the questionnaire format. The strengths is reduce bias due to question consistency from one to another. And you're not, if I'm doing an interview, I might ask you question A in a certain way, but then I ask Mona question A in another way. So that's a bit inconsistent right there already. It makes it harder if you're not using a questionnaire to formulate that data and collate the data together. You want to use it as a quick way to massive amounts of data. That's the strength behind the questionnaire. Like last week again, we went through contextual interviews, and I was saying that it takes a while information from one user. Well, questionnaire is completely different. It's fast as long as you're able to phrase and design questionnaires correctly. So, what's the weaknesses though? I mean, the time taken might not, it varies depending on the length of your questionnaire. Also, responders might not actually respond to your questionnaire depending on how you administer it. So if you do a mass mailing, like how do you do telemarketing, it's half of the people just slam the phone down and rage. So participants might not also take it seriously. So there's a bit of a iffy gray area right here, right? And you might not know if it's self-administered, that if every responder actually understands each question the way you intend them to, since there's no one around to explain it to them. So we're going to take a look at this video. I'd like you to record, at least for each person, one thing that's wrong with his formatting or his administration of the questionnaire.
Hello, I'm doing a survey on whether people are healthy in this village, and I think they are. I'm going to ask a few people at random who, if they are. Oh, hello, ladies.
Sorry,
Could you
training?
Oh, could you come over here? I'm doing a survey, please. Could you come over here?
I'm in the middle of training.
Oh, okay. Well, I'm just going to do a survey on whether people are healthy in this village. Could I have your first name, please?
Well, I don't usually give my first name to strangers.
Well, I want your first name and your address, please. Your phone number.
Jenny, I won't give you my address.
Oh, Jenny. Have I ever told you that is one of my most favourite names, Jenny?
No, because I've never met you.
Okay. Jenny, what is your age?
20. Why do you want to know?
Well, I just want to know your age.
21.
Oh, yeah. Shall I put you as 20? Because I've got 2 boxes for that, and that's probably nearer the answer, yeah? So if we double it, that'll probably be nearer there. Are you fat?
Do you want to slap in your face?
Do I look fat?
Depends who you're asking, isn't it? You look all okay, but not too bad. Okay, I will tick. No, then shall I tick in between?
No,
Yeah.
no.
Carbohydrates can be modified into glycolipids by combining with fats. Therefore, we must eat more carbohydrates.
Speak English.
Pardon?
Well, do you disagree? Disagree strongly? Don't know? Agree or strongly agree?
Can you repeat?
No, just give me the answer.
I don't know.
Don't. Okay. What colour eyes have you got? Blue or brown?
Green.
It's sort of like ponding colour, aren't they? Alright, ponding colour.
Let's carry on with this then.
Hold on. Running makes you healthy. Now listen, will you be quiet? Running makes you healthy, and you have to be an idiot not to think so. Do you agree or not agree?
No, I don't know.
Well, there's no don't know. It's either agree or disagree. One or other.
What's the question
Even the Muppets here. Running makes you healthy, and you have to be an idiot not to think so. Do you agree or
It's
disagree?
okay, I agree.
Agree, thank you. What sport do you participate in? Lacrosse or tennis?
Neither.
Oh, okay. There's no sport
I'm
called,
running.
I don't know a sport called neither. Okay, right. How much money do you spend on sport each week? Not a lot by looks of things, but anyway. 0 to £2, 3 to 5, 6 to 8, or 9 to 11.
None of those.
Well, there's not none of those. You've got to tell me what one. What, 0 to 2? I think that's probably about right. How much do you spend on healthy eating each week? How much? 0 to £2 again, I think. 2 to 4, 4 to 6, or 6 to 8.
More.
More than that? Well, I haven't got more than that. Okay. Well, I put more than that. I'm going to have to blow some magic bubbles out of my...
Can I go now?
No. Anyway, what did you have to eat last night? I think I can guess this myself. Chips, chocolate, or curry? Or all three? All three, yeah, you did it. Shall I take it? Oh, did you? Was it chips,
Cocktail
chocolate?
starter, then I have usually.
If you do not do sport, you end up with no friends, nobody likes you, and you're a loser. Do you do sport? Yes or no? Thank you for your
Survey.
Go away. Horrible woman. Thank you.
Alright, so that's obviously a satire on how to not make a survey of a questionnaire. So let's start with you. What do you think was wrong with that?
Very personal questions, and the fact that I think there was a question when he said, if you can, you're an idiot if you don't think that.
Yeah.
I just had a really disrespectful attitude in general. Use sophisticated wording for some questions that's not related to their knowledge or something.
The intro was he introduced bias in the introduction, and then it selectively chose people who are exercising.
They didn't even really seem to want it. He didn't want to participate. He didn't really care.
Well, You talking about the administrator or the participants?
The participants didn't really want to participate. You kind of
Yeah.
just like go ask them to do it. So.
So what was wrong with it? Everything. Well, so I listed a few things, but I'm sure I missed some. So interrupting at a bad time. So like people who are jogging don't like to be interrupted. Asking inappropriate questions. Only recruiting active people for a survey about health. Asking irrelevant questions. Bad question formatting, such as like, what is your age? Like, I don't know, like 20, 25, 30, like those are your only choices or whatever. Bias questions, such as like, blah, 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 and you're an idiot if you don't agree. Do you agree or not? Questions that couldn't be understood. Not allowing participants to withdraw, that's a no-no. That's what I have.
Cool, that was a lot.
Is there anything left? I think no permission is taken for the video, for making the video,
Yeah.
and also I think yeah, there was a continuous laugh in the background.
Yeah, that was a little person taking a picture or taking video.
I think there were some irrelevant answer choices in some questions, but at least I think in the final part he thanked the participants, so yeah, that was a positive point.
Maybe that made up for all of it.
Yeah.
Well, I don't know if you heard this, but he kind of swore at the two participants while they were running the wings.
Oh.
Yes.
So the first thing is that there's no introduction for the research, and there's no introduction for himself, and there's no agreement for the contractor or something of the private usage of the personal data. And the other thing is that I think he's doing research for the health condition in a village where. So, but he chooses to interview with some people who are running. So maybe I think he should randomly choose people, but I think maybe it's not.
So you're talking about there's already a bias towards like selecting a specific category.
Actually, for some of the answers, they had overlap answers like 0 to 3 to 3 to 5, 5 to 6, and there was another one. 0 to 15, 15 to 16.
Yeah, I don't think there's anything left. It would have been much harder if you said, name one thing that this guy did right.
Why not? You brought it on yourself, come on.
It's harder, so.
Well, like I guess only mentioned, he did thank the participants.
And then swore.
Although he swore them, he did remember to, okay, thank you instead of talk.
Well, at least he came prepared, I guess.
That's true. But preparedness is a different, it can be viewed from a different perspective,
Yeah.
right? In terms of, I don't think he was prepared in terms of he didn't pilot the test, he didn't review the test, he didn't get any iterations done. He just say, hey, this is perfect, now I'm going to ask him. All right, so again, don't do what he does, all right? So I have a second part exercise based on what I've talked to Tony. Oh, what? Okay, so the second part is I'm going to briefly introduce to a project I'm working on, and then I'm going to ask you to come up with 3 questions, all right? So, the project I'm working on right now is actually a police training simulator for the Calgary Police Service. This simulator is going to be used to train their recruits at the Police Academy at West Hills. So the goal is, based on the last round of usability testing, I wanted to see if there was a perceived value of the use of the simulator that I've developed here. After pre-running it with a few sample participants, I like a justification in the continuation of my project, and hopefully be able to obtain some needed feedback from these test participants as well. So my target demographic, the current police officers and trainers. So my administration plan is to administer this questionnaire in class after they finish the test. They have 2 days to reply with the questionnaire. So, these are the following 3 questions I'd like to ask. So I'd like to know if the test participants thought that their skills were improved after the simulation. Second, I wanted to know if they found the simulation useful. And third, I'd like to know what they found useful about this simulation. So this simulation is PC only, and it's built in the same kind of format as you would see Call of Duty or Battlefield. All right, so please come up with these 3 questions.
So you want us to write questions and address each of these points?
Yep. And to help you guys, I have a sample.
Just one question, including all
Pardon?
just one question including all the aspects.
Pardon? I can't.
So we just need to ask, creating one question, which including.
No, there are 3 questions, so create a question for each. There you go. more minutes to those who haven't completed yet. So we good? All right. So I guess I'll go first. So obviously I started out because this was an actual real questionnaire that I used at the start of September. So I started out with an introduction. So now they've completed a trial run of the Dalhousie shooter simulation. We would appreciate if you could help us with the improvement of software in the training simulator if you were able to answer a few questions. So essentially, be really nice and be elaborate as much as you can on the privacy and what the data is really useful. So for the first two questions, this is what I came up with. I forgot the name of the category really. But how confident do you feel about your skills if you were to perform the same containment technique in a real life situation? Confident, 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 very confident, really confident. And this kind of addresses your question earlier that, I followed it up with an open formatted area to that question. And then same with the second one. And then what they like most about the situation, which is basically a checklist. And I followed up by an empty space for them to add in more if they needed. But essentially what happened was that all the elements that I've listed for the checkbox is actually what I felt was more important. Everything else I left out and left it up to the responder to fill in if he had any additional concerns. So starting with your game, what did you come up with?
For the first one, I think I have pretty similar to yours. So it's, do you think the simulation has improved your skill on real life situations? So it's basically a life skill. For the other one, how would you rate the usefulness of the training simulation? And I would also add like a second category of please circle the areas in which you found the simulation useful. And the third one, I just left out as an open-ended question of what do you like about the simulation.
Okay.
So for the first one, I thought of maybe asking them both before and after how they would rate their skills in a specific situation, so then you could see if there was a difference after the training. The second one was pretty much the same as yours, and the third one I just had as an open-ended one, but I like what you did with the checklist as well.
For the first one, I asked what skills improvements would you like to be added to the software? This was an open question, and for the second one, I asked to what extent was this product helpful in your training process? When the first is the highest and 10 is the lowest. And then for the third question, I asked them to rank the different parts of the program, so I provided a checklist of all the aspects of the program.
For the first one, I initially thought maybe a skill would be good, but then I thought if you said it would probably be fine. But if you thought that your skills were reduced as part of the training, which would kind of be bad, but hopefully this didn't happen. But to give people the option for that, I just hit a scale where 5 is like same as before and 10 is like way better and 0 is a lot worse. Probably should have more well-defined terms for those. For the second one, I just wrote, I found the training simulation useful, and then respond again by Likert scale. And then for the last one, pretty similar to what everybody said so far. Like either choose ABC. It could be an ABC thing with an option for other, like you did, or just the blanks.
For the first one, I have a Likert scale saying my skills have improved to handle real life situations with like strongly agree, disagree, somewhat agree, or cannot decide. And then the second one I have, please rank how useful you find this training simulation from like extremely not helpful to like extremely helpful. And then last one I just have an open-ended where please list what you enjoyed in the simulation training.
So for me, so for the first one, I said, to what extent do you believe the simulation helped you improve your skills? I had a Likert scale from 1 to 7, with 1 being not at all, 4 being somewhat, and 7 being very much. For the second one, I had the question states, how would you rate the usefulness of the simulation? With, again, the Likert scale from 1 to 7, with 1 being not useful, to 4 being somewhat useful, to 7 being very useful. And then for the last one, I just wrote, that one's an open-ended one, and I just wrote, do you have any comments regarding the simulation? And then I ended off by saying, thank you for your participation, have a great day.
Wow. One question for you though, is like, why did you go off to a scale of 7?
I don't know, I just picked a random number. Like I picked a number in which I had like some, like an odd number. I don't know why I picked 7, but like, I don't know, it was just in my mind, but like I picked an odd number because I wanted the middle to be like such that there was like an equal number of choices on the left and on the right. So
this brings up a good point, is that Brandon was actually thinking about how he was going to quantify and collate his data already. So that's one thing that's really important when you come up with these questionnaires, is that you already have a game plan on how you're going to, put your data together and then come up with your solution.
Yeah, so the first question would be close-ended. The question is, are you confident in applying your skills in real-life scenarios based on your simulation learning? Maybe.
Very precise.
Yeah, maybe 5-point Likert scale. And then the other 2 questions are kind of open-ended. So I asked, how did you apply your simulation knowledge in real life? Just to know the experiences. And the third question is, what do you like about the simulations? So,
okay.
Very open-ended.
Yeah. For me, well, I decided the first question to be open-ended, so I just rearranged the questions and put the first one to the last question.
Okay, I see what you did.
And for the second one, I chose the differential scale from 1 to 7, maybe that's randomly. And for the third one, I also used a checklist and used some of the sections like the UI design, similarity to actual environment, natural game controls, and graphics and things like that.
So what were your questions?
I haven't written that.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
Okay.
So my first one, I keep that open-ended, and I put it to the last as well. Yeah. For the second one, I don't have the open-ended one. I just kept it as a checklist, as a differential scale, 1 to 5. For the third one, I think it's pretty the same.
Okay, and you didn't come up with the questions yet?
Yeah,
okay.
I don't have a pen.
Okay.
Okay, for the first one, I was thinking about the Likert scales.
Yes.
Like, this simulation has the potential to be applied to real-life simulation, like strongly disagree.
Okay.
And for the second question, I was thinking about choice of categories and how often do you imagine yourself using this training simulation, like not at all once a week. And for the third one, I was thinking about a checklist one, like please circle the things that you liked about the simulation, and also having an open-ended question at the end.
Okay. So it's pretty, your last one's pretty similar to mine. Cool.
So
Last
the-
but not least.
For the first question, I had something similar to yours. So a Likert scale, and this simulation has been, well, it has improved my skills in my daily tasks, and whether to strongly agree and disagree, agree, or neither agree and disagree.
Mhm.
For the second question, I also had a Likert scale. So how useful did you find this simulation with useful, not useful, and in between? For the third one, I did have a checklist. I didn't know exactly what aspects of the simulation that I would include
Yeah.
as like options. However, I included a none. So, for example, what did you like about the simulation? Maybe they didn't like anything, so there was a none. And there is an option for other, in which they can just write their own comments in. I like, however, what you had here, which is what you liked and what you disliked. This is something that I didn't have here yet, so I think it's cool.
So I think you can all start to see, and Tony actually pointed this out to me, that pretty much everyone had their own interpretation of how a specific question can be written as. So there's no real wrong or right if comparing, like, sorry, Ben, I'm going to use you again because you're right there in the website. And God, what? Julia, there you go. I'm sorry. Just having a brain fart right now. So, I mean, it all really depends on what you actually want to find out. And for a couple of you, I know that, yes, this was a really quick exercise, but you also still want to try to break it down in a real kind of questionnaire. Break down your problems even more, to be more specific to the scenario. Don't just ask it to be too general unless that's your intent of just getting any brief, rough feedback. You know, if you're actually intending on collating the data and quantifying it, be as specific as possible and narrow it down to a situation. So for this example, I would say, okay, in this particular simulation situation, did you find it useful, or did you think you can cross-apply it with dealing with the same situation in real life, rather than if you think it's useful, right? So it helps you define that a lot more in terms of the respondent perception on your actual software, all right? And second is that, don't forget the intro, don't forget the closing and the thank you, and minimize your bias also, all right? So with that, I'm going to conclude it. So are there any questions?
So thanks. Questions for
I'm sorry, I'll go this way.
Okay, so I guess you alluded to this a bit, but I'm just wondering, I know in questionnaires I've taken in the past, they'll ask sort of the same question rewritten, like rephrased, and I'm not sure if that's to try to find out whether the person is giving consistent answers. So I'm wondering how do you kind of deal with people that answer the questionnaire inconsistently?
That all comes down to, I mean, in that case, you have the responsibility as a question designer to then make sure you ask just one question and be as appropriate as possible. I mean, it's guaranteed, like, you know, obviously you want to ensure consistency, but do you really have to ensure consistency if your original question was already written in such a way that the respondent was able to say, okay, you know, yeah, you know, I'll give you the correct answer, that's done. See what I mean? So it's actually the designer's prerogative to phrase his question in a really simple way that it gets you the accurate response that you need. It's cheap, but I'm sorry.
You can go first. Maybe I can better articulate.
All right.
Well, my question was almost the same as Julia's. I wanted to know how you're going to validate if the answer is correct and precise, or it's just a random answer, maybe the
Well,
person
in response to that as well, I mean, that's where you start also playing the numbers game. I mean, sometimes guaranteed in questionnaires and surveys, you're going to get bad answers. You know, there's no way to avoid that sometimes. But I mean, the way you can minimize it is, again, just play the numbers game. I mean, make sure your questions are as straightforward as possible. And as long as you do that, that's all you can really do, honestly. If someone decides to answer inconsistently, it is what it is, and hopefully you have the mass amount of numbers other than that to back or help you with your data in that aspect.
So you mentioned, well, we talked a lot about Likert scales, I guess, which are, I suppose, ordinal. So like the distance between 2 and 3 is not necessarily the same as the distance between 5 and 6. Is there any way we could ask similar questions and make it more quantifiable?
That's a good question. Damn.
I have an idea, but I want to hear your thoughts first.
One way you could probably do it is to either select, let's see, either select a different format or use something or another format that has more, in my opinion, a higher range attached to it. You know, for example, oh, okay, sorry, it's not displaying. Give me a sec. So for a differential scale, for example, obviously when we're dealing with numbers, it's a lot more quantifiable in terms of your data received, in terms of your response, right? So if you need a wider range of data, I mean, there are other formats like, not too familiar with this, like SMQ or LN, that it's by another paper from Dix, I think, that they go up from a scale of 1 to 127. So that allows you to really fine-tune your data, but it really depends on what you really need. Typically, it's just like what Omi was saying, or Brendan was saying earlier as well. Like, why did you choose 1 to 7? Because, you know, I felt that I needed the data to reflect this range instead of 1 to 10, for example. Right? It's typically up to what you actually need and what you need to obtain from that specific question. Now, in terms of actual format, again, like I said, I'm not too sure on, you know, XMQ or LN, but it's in a paper that I read that they went up to 1 to 127 on arbitrary range to allow more variance of responses and more quantitative data. Then it becomes a matter of, can responders actually appropriately respond to that question or mark the question off properly? Because it seems like if you have a range of 1 to 127 on a piece of paper, it's kind of hard as a responder. Now, as a questionnaire designer, definitely you want that you want to fine-tune data as much as you can. But then you also have to think about the usability and the respondability from the audience that you're actually getting the response from.
Right.
Is that kind of?
Yeah, that's definitely helpful. Is it okay if can I respond to that bit? I think, yeah, like the 127 point scale is probably gives you more differentiation, and that's a good thing. Although you sort of brought this up, but yeah, it's maybe sort of hard to figure out, like, really what's the difference between 124 and 125? Like,
exactly.
how far do we need to go? But there's this cool, well, I think it's a cool, I don't know, question or I guess response type called visual analog skills, where you just give participants a line and they just mark on the line. So really, like, the the number of, it's like an infinite Likert scale or an infinite differential scale. So you can put anywhere on the line.
It's exactly in the paper that was defined by, again, I think it's by Dix. I did the review on it, but it's exactly what you described. It's just a line, and then as a responder, you click on one line. But then in the paper, what's interesting is that it's harder to do that on a questionnaire, but paper questionnaire versus an online questionnaire, because in an online questionnaire, we have an UI that allows responders to more accurately select their range, whereas on paper, it's like there's a limited amount of space and you're just kind of ticking it off based on what you're guessing at. So there's this perception of, I don't know how to fill this out because I don't know ratios, but then if it's online, hey, now it's represented in a different way. I know exactly what I want. So it's UI. It's kind of weird like that, perceptions and all.
I'm not sure. Do you mean like in terms of screen real estate or like?
In terms of, let's say we have on a computer, we're able to have a movable bar like this.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas on computer, yeah. On paper, you have a limited amount of space in there. Sorry, I'm going to go for a second. We have this much space for a question, but we have just one line. So the perception is, how do I answer or respond to this, right, as a responder? Versus, oh, I see this draggable and clickable thing right here, I can just drag it over. See what I mean?
So you're saying that people have a hard time using it on paper?
Yeah.
Oh.
I can actually provide a paper on that.
And so to me, the answer to this is, like, I think this is sort of the typical approach to answer Jennifer's particular question. Though my take on it is that so the reason you would do this is because you get to use all the you get access to a bunch of tests that you're not allowed to use otherwise, right? So we did this in R last time. We talked about if you had ordinal data, you have to use certain tests, and if you have this sort of scalar data, you get to use this kind of thing. Or if you have scalar, did I get that right? Did I say that right? Do you guys know what I'm saying? Like, yeah, depending on the data. But I think that there's still this central question that it doesn't really do a great job of answers. Like, you can use this and get like, oh, it's, like 0 to 1, this is like 0.3, this person answered at 0.8, and this person answered at 0.57 or whatever. So you can do that by actually doing all these measurements. But I think that there's this central issue still of like, does 0.2 mean the same thing to me as it means to Mona, let's say? And it may not. And then so I feel like taking this extra step may give you a false sense of security about what your data actually means, kind of. Like, just because it's easier to manipulate doesn't mean that it's better data, sort of.
Right, like precision versus accuracy.
Yeah, like, yeah. So
well, it's also, like Tony said, is comprehension, right? I mean, everyone has different comprehension of what each thing means. And I mean, there's no real right or wrong, honestly, when it comes to questionnaire. I can't say what you're doing is right or wrong. It really depends on what you want to do with that data. You know what I mean? It's like, if you come up with a Likert skill, yeah, that sounds fun. I can check the formatting, I can check my understanding, but, ultimately it's you who needs to manipulate and use the data, right? So.
Other questions for Nathaniel? I wanted to just underscore one point. So you talked a little bit about this when you said review, and you had kind of like one bullet on like a word that said comprehension. I think that this is actually surprisingly difficult to get right. So rather than asking a question, I'm just going to point it out. It is often the case that people interpret the question differently than you had intended. So I was trying to like find some examples online, but I couldn't dig any up because I couldn't figure out what question to ask Google, basically. So, but actually this happens to me all the time when I design tests for say 481. So one of the questions that I asked in my undergrad HCI course was, list 2 types of human errors that good design needs to address. Then provide a short interaction example for each of the 2 error types. Okay? So what I was looking for was basically a label, an explanation for it, and then an interaction example. 2 times 2. Okay? That's exactly what I was looking for. For some people, unfortunately this was not common. For some people they would just list 2 things, like the 2 names basically, and then try to give an interaction example without explaining it. Does that make sense? So they interpreted the question differently than I'd intended. And actually, so every time, so I feel like I need to change this question because I feel like I need to explain what it means a little bit more, because by the letter, they've actually done it right. They've listed 2 types of human errors that good design needs to address. They've listed it, right? And they've provided a short interaction example. Like, nowhere in there did I actually say you need to explain what the actual problem is. So it's surprising. So this happens surprisingly frequently when we were designing questionnaires. And so with respect to the comprehension thing, I think that it's important to to pilot test this thing with kind of the people that you expect to use it with, because the vocabulary that they work from is different necessarily from the vocabulary that you are working from. Does that make sense? And then, okay, so so my question would have been like, what happens when you run into one of these problems? And I think the answer is basically, well, come up with something better.
Well, break it down to be more precise.
Yeah, I think one thing that I've typically done is actually, as like I have a person go through the question and I ask them like, what do you think this is asking you, basically. So you can actually, it's kind of meta, but you can have a think aloud protocol like while they do a pilot test of your questionnaire essentially, and you can actually understand. And or the other thing you could do is you could ask them like, you can tell them this is what I'm trying to get with this question, and you can see whether they're interpreting it in the right way, sort of. So I found that tip that works reasonably well. That was what I wanted to underscore. Yeah, right. Okay, I think we're good. Thank you very much. Okay, next time is Elena Brenna. Right? Thanks guys, we're done.
Okay, so in your email, you said
Sure. Is it okay if I go to Gooder first? But I'll leave my stuff here though. Do you want me to do that?
Oh, no, that's fine.
Okay, fine. I'll be back in a couple
Yeah,
minutes.
sure. Why don't you get
Yeah, so like there's a question here.
how long do you think my intro class should take?
Yep.
Like, I was down here, something, and then you guys are here like 5
So,
minutes each.
there are a few
Oh,
questions.
yeah, you don't have to answer this. This would have been what I would have asked.
Oh, okay.
So those are the questions that I'm generating as I'm listening to you talk. You don't have to answer.
Yeah, that's great. They were funny, and I felt like I was the only one laughing, so I appreciate
Oh,
it.
shoot, yeah,
I
sorry.
tried to go with the.
We forgot to do the like-dislike thing.
Oh.
Everything was perfect.
Okay. Thank you. Okay, awesome. Should we do it real fast? Something like,
It was energetic, like that.
okay, something to improve.
I expect our exercise to be before what he did himself. So yeah,
Okay.
that's good.
Something that you liked.
Oh, I like the thing that he described the concepts with the examples, like telling an example about this type of question.
Something to improve, Jennifer.